to welcome you. This is a historical event for us, particularly for me, because this is our first one. And in the process, I ascertained that one of the biggest problems that guys with PTSD have is, and I'm not qualified to make any medical judgment or spiritual judgment, I'm just a common, ordinary guy. But in my opinion, what the guys need more is somebody to talk to who has been there, who's been in war and understands what it feels like to be shot at, to be surrounded by explosives and so on and so forth. And in hearing stories from other veterans of what they've been through and how they've dealt with it, how they've helped others deal with it, I think maybe that will be helpful to a lot of veterans. And there's a longer story involved in how I came up with a concept of spiritual healing. I like to say it's a search for God's help in dealing with the wounds of combat. Well, it's whoever the higher power is that you believe in. For me, that's God. So I talk about God. But, you know, I'm not trying to offend anybody. So that's what we're doing. I had this concept a year ago. I started the planning last year, about this time. So that's what we're all about. We have to let veterans know that we're here and we're willing to help. There are lots of veterans organizations that touch on spiritual healing, but that's not the only thing they do. They do other things, so that might be a couple hours. All we're doing is spiritual healing. We have to be able to reach down and tell our innermost secrets in public, in this group. What comes out in this room stays in this room, and we don't talk about it. We're trying to heal, and when you have to heal, you have to be able to talk about what it is that's bothering you. Because of the way that this came about, I feel like it's my mission from God. God has truly put this thing together for me.
As I say, I appreciate your effort and trying to put this together. I think that's a wonderful thing.
So thank you. It's why I get up every morning. I'm going to do it until I'm dismissed.
That's good.
Again, why I got involved. Of course, Tom. I got to meet Tom a couple of years ago. He's a pretty persuasive guy, number one. But I know how passionate he is about this. And when we sat down, and you'll get to meet Nina and so on, but they are two very influential people in my life, coming to Greensburg, working in Greensburg as a high school principal. And I know what his goals are for this. And even though this weekend I want to sit there and I have some things that I want to discuss about resiliency and so on, and what his goals are for it, and the spiritual side of things. But I think what we want from you also, more than anything out this weekend, first to get to know you, number one, but also that feedback that he's talking about, because I know where he wants this to be and where we need to be. But your feedback's going to be so important. Bring people together, because it was ironic. We had a platoon of Greensburg, Pennsylvania, this rural community here, bringing another unit together from D.C., inner city. So we two walks of life and trying to make it work with two commander and first sergeant, who don't even get to see each other much. That was an experience, a learning experience, and that's where when we thought about doing something like this. And again, with me being Christian, but I had a platoon full of soldiers that from inner city D.C. that were some Buddhists, Muslims, and Hindus, and it was new to me. I'm from rural Pennsylvania. It was an eye opener, but I had to somehow relate and figure that out, and that's where I learned to even attend some of those different things for them. I'm still that. I grew up Brethren, now I'm Lutheran. My mother's Catholic. So we're kind of all over the place, but that's okay. But I think we all, we're all for the same person, the same goal. So I think this program, what we want to do here, and again, I'm going to talk about resiliency at some point here tonight or tomorrow morning, because I think that's very important. And resiliency is something that we discuss in schools nowadays all the time, because we all have struggles in our lives all the time. But how are we overcoming those struggles? How are we battling back? And we do a lot of resiliency training with our soldiers right now, because they're dealing with a lot of emotional issues, whether it be family, whether it be military, whether it be work-related or so on. And when they hit that wall, how do we overcome and break through? A couple things. I'm going back to our mission and what our purpose is. And I look at, starting off where he has welcome to Veterans Angels, I'm looking at this right now, before I even get to resiliency. And then back to our mission. I really think that I really didn't sit there and focus on this. Like, we've looked at it many times, but I'm sitting there going through it as you're talking too, because it's like, connect, Veterans Angels seek to help combat veterans connect. I'm looking at these words, connect with spiritual healing. And however that spiritual healing is for certain people, whatever works for anybody. But I believe that spiritual healing is what kind of keeps us motivated and keeps us resilient at times. And when I sit there and think about, when we go back to our spiritual healing, and I think about faith and the faith that I had while I was deployed, and even before I was deployed, but I think it reinforced it for me. And when I came home, I think that supported my resiliency for when I came home. And I think your faith, as you talked about, supporting your own resiliency.
But when Tom asked me to be part of his board, Veteran Angels board, I was really honored. I'm thinking, how am I going to inspire you when I have done nothing to parallel your life's experience? So what I do, I'm a statistics person, so I looked up the statistics for the Iraq and Afghanistan war. And 1 in 5 veterans have PTSD. And 20% of the suicides in the country are veterans. When you look at what a survivor is, and I prefer to look at a survivor as one who seizes the opportunity of the moment and is not trying to find life or understand it, but rather forces it to have meaning, especially when you're still in battle, because you're surviving and maybe some of your other people in your troop are not. Then you return home and you try to understand what it is like being a survivor. So the more we persist to understand something and the phenomenon of life, the more you cannot alter the reality of your experiences. You can't alter it, it happened. And so it is very difficult to let go of the traumatic past because it's part of us. And part of you have been lost on that battlefield. What we tend to forget is that we have to come to terms with our loss. What is that loss? It's the loss of who you were. So you have to come to terms with it, and we have to have the courage to grieve what is lost. I believe that you have to have the courage to grieve. And when you grieve, I firmly believe that God walks beside you. He is there for you, but you have to believe He is there. I carry my prayer cards in my purse. It's somewhere around here. There are prayer cards in my purse. If I don't go to Mass, I turn on the TV and pray in front of the TV. And guess what? I am a daffodil. I am a daffodil, and I still bend, but I'll never break. I'll never break, and God did hear me. But what I didn't understand is He wasn't going to pick me up. I had to do it myself. And so what I want you to do is, in your darkest hour, look beneath the surface, because you are there, and you will find yourself again, it's not gonna be the same person, but it's gonna be a person of value and a person of purpose and somebody who can really, really give back to the community and to God's earth. I'm not on the battlefield, and I'm thinking, how can I even relate to you people? How can I do this, to do that? And one of the most inspirational people in my life was my grandmother. You know, just her fortitude and her spirit, and you know, the daffodil story just stuck with me. So God made me a daffodil, and He did. But I lifted myself up, and you have to work at it. It's tough because you know what? You fall back down. So you just have to kind of pick yourself back up.
You have made all of us feel very humble.
Amen.
A little bit about my service. I'm RA all the way. I joined the United States Army in 1969. So my attitudes about war were shaped, and I heard, I don't know if, Father, if it was you talking about how we dehumanize people, but I remember the exact instant that I stopped calling Vietnamese gooks. And here comes a 10-ton pulling up, and he's blowing his horn. And I looked over, I'm the guard, right? I looked over and the guy yelled out the window, "Hey man, it's a kid in your truck. He's stealing." And he jumped out of the truck and started running. And I took my 16 and aimed right at his back. And all I know was the hand of God. I went like that. And I thought about that years later, how close I came to shooting a 10-year-old boy in his back. And had I done that, would I be where I am now? And those two things had a real impact on me. And it really affected me to a great deal. Yet in hindsight, I thought God had spared me for some reason from committing those horrendous acts of killing somebody, even running them over in a truck. And I know the last thing I would ever remember is that man's face looking up at me, cussing me out if I'd done that, or if I shot that kid in the back.
So I'll tell you a little bit about myself before I talk. I'm going to talk about depression today. Before I start, by a show of hands, who knows someone that deals with depression? Yeah. I'm a mental health counselor by degree and by profession. When you talk about listening, that's what I do. I listen. I listen to what people say. I also listen to what people don't say. We've talked today about different branches of the service. My name is George Scott. I grew up in Joliet, Illinois. I wrestled 8th grade in high school, played football, and I couldn't play basketball. I couldn't make a layup to save my life, but I could always wrestle. So I left Joliet, graduate high school, '89, and I went in the Marine Corps. In the Marine Corps, we were taught if you can't drink all night and run all day, you're not a good Marine. So I mastered one of the two. Guess what it was? The thing is, once you start to drink, you never forget how to drink. So when we drink, and even though we stopped, I haven't had a drink since July 5th of 1999, the day I was incarcerated. But I still remember how. But what I do now is I replace that behavior with other behaviors.
Amen.
Yes.
Okay? By the power of God.
Amen.
And by a vow that I made to myself, I would never let anyone control me like that again. So I went to the Marine Corps, and I had a pretty easy enlistment, except for the times that I inflicted pain upon myself. So I went from PFC up to a sergeant, back to a PFC. 6.5 years. So I ended up getting kicked out of the Marine Corps. I said, well, what am I going to do now? And I started to deal with depression because that's all I ever wanted to be was a Marine. That was it. I didn't want to be a husband, didn't want to be a son, didn't want to be nothing, a pilot, nothing. I wanted to be a Marine. That was it. So I become so upset and judgmental, I attacked that man and his wife. Boot stomp, both of them in the street, and almost killed them. So they had to sweep them up, medevac them to Loyola up in Chicago. That was Monday, July 5th of '99. That was the last Newport I smoked. That was the last drink I had. And so I was sentenced to 25 years in prison, Illinois Department of Correction. Came back, somehow miraculously my service record book showed up before they were going to sentence me. Got broken down to 10 years. So I did 8.5 years, Class X felony is 85%. So 8.5 years for drinking alcohol, fighting. So yes, you can be healed, you can be delivered. Ask that question for your point. Yeah, you can be delivered and healed from anything. It's difficult to find employment here in Pennsylvania, a lot because of the Sandusky thing up in Penn State. But God has brought me through. God has brought me through. You know. So what I'm going to talk about today is depression. It's depression. What depression is and what it looks like. Okay, because I dealt with it. Some of y'all have dealt with it. It may not have been clinical depression or major depressive disorder, but you may have been depressed at some time.
George.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned God a lot. You want to tell them what you said about God the first time I saw you?
Yes, sir. I met Mr. Abraham up in Simplify Odyssey up on the mountain. This was back in June of 17, or June of 18. And General Jones asked us, I can't remember the question he asked us.
He said, we went around the horn, and on the third time going around the horn, he said, tell us something that you're most, that you're not so proud of.
Yes.
That happened.
Yeah. He said, tell us something you're not proud of.
Yeah.
And so everybody went around, oh, I cheated on my wife, I lost a job and this. And I stood up, and I didn't want to say it, but I did. I said, I lost confidence in God. And everybody looked at me like, I was like, you asked. And I had. Because of everything I had gone through. And it was all self-inflicted. There were choices I made. And that's what I try to get my clients to see. That's what I try to get my students to see. We have choices. Life is all about choices. Life deals you up on the lemons. Make us lemon cake. Lemonade gets boring. Make lemon cake. Now, can people do that who are diagnosed with depression? Absolutely. If they get the proper help. But it's up to us to get them that help. It's up to us to get them that help. And if we deal with depression, it's up to us to ask for help.
George, thanks for coming and being with us.
Good.
And I do hope you'll come back again, because
Yes, sir.
this program is going to survive, and there's a lot of people we got to reach, and we need you, and we need Sean, and everybody else that we've had. So,
Sir.
thank you. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
ma'am.
To me, it was one of the best classes that graduated from Greensburg-Salem. And there are a lot of people with such a big heart, and Dan's one of them. So Dan, we'll introduce Dan.
This is a
House.
Southwest girl too.
Dan was a Marine in Vietnam.
Because of my Marine Corps background, it so happened that the Marine Corps' National Transition Program for its wounded, injured, and ill ended up in Boswell. How could you believe that? Boswell, Pennsylvania. Nothing there but a blinking yellow light. That's Boswell. And it used to be a Boy Scout camp. I'm sure you knew that. And so I got involved with Tom because his mentor, General Neal, 4-star General Neal, he and I were lieutenants together. in that battle that Tom just briefly talked about, there were 7 officers that went out, and there were only 2 of us that walked off the hill, Butch and I. And so Butch Neal mentored Tom Jones, who then told me when Tom Jones came to Pennsylvania for me to look him up. And that was back in 1998. And so we've been very, very tight since then. And he was on the board of the Semper Fi Fund, which funded all the Marines that were wounded, injured, and ill, and corpsmen to go to this camp for transitioning. And then this 5013C, Semper Fi Odyssey, became very successful, and they started the Americas Fund underneath it, and now we have soldiers, sailors, and airmen. And because of that, we were now able to go to vet centers. There's 366 vet centers across the United States, and begin to tell the vet centers about our program. And now we're beginning to get veterans, when before it was primarily active duty guys. But the war has really slimmed down, and there's not very many active duty that are wounded anymore. So we're really reaching out to all the veterans. And bear in mind now, we've been at war for 18 years. So although we always think of the World War II as the greatest generation, we think, us Vietnam guys, we think the greatest generation are these guys. And post-traumatic stress disorder. Vietnam guys had PTSD, but we didn't even know the word. We didn't know anything about it. I'm sure Abe had some PTSD, or PTS, maybe no D on the end. I certainly had PTS, but I wouldn't think I had a D on the end. But when you've had this many deployments, you know, there's only so much resiliency. I often think of it, my wife gets poison ivy just by getting near it. I didn't get any poison ivy. I could run around it and I didn't get it until a certain time later on in my life, I got poison ivy. And from now I can get it all the time. So it's kind of like you have a resistance to things, but once that resistance goes, then you're in another space. And that's what happens to these guys that have had so many deployments and on and on. My role up there, I'm what's called the senior team leader. I train the team leaders. I lead teams. I've been doing this now for 11 years. I've probably got over 11,000 hours. I've done 59 of these weeks in a row over the past 11 years. So I really have a good idea of what makes up our current warriors. Some of the things that we work with the guys that are there kind of came from this. When I heard this talk, and I was hoping something like this would help me knit together what I'm going to say. You remember when he said, "Find your broom," and it was in relation to anybody in life. You know, find your broom. And with the coach, Coach Wooden, this is very simple. You know, he was out there sweeping the court. That was his broom. And obviously the court's everything to him. That's where everything happens, is on the court. It's like a football coach. Everything happens on the field. That's the place where you go to play, and so forth and so on. So the broom that we work with, of course there's more than one broom, but the one I want to talk about kind of goes along with Father John here, that he was speaking to me when he talks about, you know, we really don't know. Some people think they do, but not me. I know that there's something bigger than me, no doubt about it. And when I get my first team, I'll ask them that. You know, all men are created equal. I'll say, do you believe that? In the beginning, God, do you believe that? Do you believe I love you? Do you believe that? Do you believe how important genuine concern is? And do you believe that you really need to have humility in life if you're going to get anywhere? And so when I talk about that, I'm really trying to get them to tell me, as they respond to that, I get a sense of where their attitude is. And if the attitude isn't good, then the rest of everything that we do during the week isn't going to be as good. So I have to focus on the attitude right away. And as I do that, I can move the attitude a little quicker, and then the content that we deliver to them is received in the way that we would like it to be received, in a way that they can use it. And then there's a point in time when I ask them, all men are created equal, I'll say, and I'll usually get somebody like George C. Scott to come up and stand beside me, and there's George C. Scott, and I say to the group, I'll say, now, all men are created equal. Are you sure about that? You know, George, you look at George, and I'll look at George, and he'll look at me, and I'll say, well, what are we really created equal with? That we can all agree on, independent of whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or whatever. And the one thing that we can really count on is that we have unlimited worth and dignity. So the point is, the one thing that we all have in common is this: when people mess on us, doesn't matter what your religion is, it hurts. really hurts. So why is that? Because somehow or another, we have this thing that I call, you can use whatever word you want. I call it unlimited worth and dignity. We're all born with it. And we express it in whatever way that we can express it over our lives, this unlimited worth and dignity. And if you've had this unlimited worth and dignity, I always start talking to the guys that I'm there, and I'll use an example. Once I get them to nod their heads, can you guys all nod your heads that what we're really created equal with is unlimited worth and dignity, because you know that when people mess on you, you don't like it. And when you mess on others, they don't like it. And I'll finally get them to nod their heads. Everybody nod your heads. Nod your heads. Okay, same thing I do there. Get them to nod their heads. And then I'll take the next step and I'll say, anybody in here have a 4-year-old that's crossing a busy street and you're with them? And there's going to be hands go up. I'll pick somebody. And I'll say, are you going to let that 4-year-old go across that busy street by him or herself? And they'll go, no. I'll say, well, why not? And they'll say, well, because the 4-year-old doesn't know the danger there. And I'll say, well, who does? I do. So I'll then say, well, who owns the responsibility then of getting the 4-year-old across the street? And I'll then get them to all say, I do. I own the responsibility. Then I tie that back and say, the responsibility then always goes to the person who knows. So now I get that established with them, that the responsibility always goes to the person who knows. So when Father John gets up and says something to his parish, next thing you got to do, you're going to have to say to them, now, what I've told you, how many of you people in here really see that? Nod your heads. Nod their heads. And then he'll say to them, now you know. And then he'll somehow work that back. Where does the responsibility lie? It relies with the person who knows. You have a responsibility. So then I go around the room and I say, Abe, do you want to be valued?
Of course, Dan.
There you go. Yes. Do you want to be accepted, Father John?
I do.
There you go. Joe, do you want to be loved?
Absolutely.
Other Joe, do you want to be loved? Point is that I then get them to understand what it is that they want. And once again, they're all saying it. So I then go say, am I hearing everybody in this group say that really what they want is to be valued, accepted, understood, loved, and trusted? And they're all nodding their heads like this. So the point is, it spells something. So there's an acronym there called VAULT. And so then I ask them, when this thing is over, what are you taking with you? You taking your wartime experiences? You taking your house? You taking your... What are you taking with you? The only thing that you can really take with you is how did you deal with other people? How did you give to them? And the way you give to somebody else is to make them feel valued, accepted, understood, loved, and trusted. And there's a way to do that. So then I start talking to them about, okay, here's how you do that. And so the first move, like he was talking about, find your broom. Find your broom. Vault is your broom. The way you can give to anybody is to know that they want to be valued. Right, George?
Yes, sir.
You're damn right. I've had a lot of great experiences with George. I love this man right back here. I do. You know, if you hear his story, you haven't heard George's story yet. Well, there's a story as good as that one you just heard with George C. Scott. We call him George C. Scott because it's not C, it's H. But nevertheless, we think about, what do I have to give? I could give some money and so forth and so on. But the thing that I really have is pieces of me that I give to another person because I know what they want, what they need. So it doesn't matter who I engage. My first move to them is to listen to what they're saying, make them feel like I understand it, because I know they want to be valued, accepted, understood. I know they want me to understand it, and usually people don't understand. They hear something, they start yakking away right away. They're not even making an attempt to understand where you're coming from. And like Father John says, my God, we're so different. Yet we all have the same thing. We're all different, but we all want the same thing, as simple as it is. The broom is that we all want to be valued, accepted, understood, loved, and trusted. So the broom is, hey, you guys, when you leave here, I know when you came, it's all about you. You have PTS, and you have this, and you have that. But you have a responsibility to meet the needs of other people. And I start with your spouse, your children, your family, things like that. And when I talk to them about vaulting their wives, they'll come back and say, you know, I did that to my wife, and she just loved it. but she said, you know, you're gonna have to keep this up for at least 3 months, otherwise I won't believe it. So once again, this whole idea of giving, not to get, but giving is dependent on you understanding what's common among all of us that we all want. And the acronym VAULT spells it all out. Just like I can go around this room and say, everybody want to be valued? Yep. Everybody want to be accepted? Yep. Everybody want to be understood? Yep. Everybody want to be loved? Yep. Everybody want to be part of a trusting group? You're going to get that. A lot of these Marines that have been out for a long period of time, and soldiers, especially the veterans, they're not in a mood to trust anybody. They've been out 7 or 8 years. They're not having success. It's really difficult for them to build any kind of trust. And so, as we do it, we got 1 week, and we've got a really good program in 1 week. But and the nice part about the vet centers now is that we're beginning to make inroads into the vet centers, and when we send them back to their vet center, they have a counselor there that they've already built a relationship with. So that counselor, because I've educated them, I've done about 46 vet centers in the last 4 months with a 1-hour presentation teaching them what we do with the people they send us. So when those people go back, that counselor can say, tell me about Vault.
Thanks for coming, and thanks for your input.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.